somebody asked about forgiveness. And I was at a gathering where somebody said, the person in charge said, you can't forgive yourself. I was quite shocked. I was thinking, wow, I don't understand. I don't understand this as this body, this John, because things have opened up and evolved, I don't know, just changed a certain way, where there was a time where I went through it was conceptual forgiveness at the time. It was an earlier stage of spiritual work, I suppose. It's good to do all sorts of therapeutic things to help free up the mind and create space and, not have things trigger so much that cause so much energy and suffering that it's really distracting. So the therapy and fixing certain things in the journey to free up the space can be very beneficial. It's also helping the condition relax and open and not really contract into that reactive pattern all the time. So therapy and looking into, a way to forgive people for what they may have done wrong to you is actually quite beneficial. But now the view of forgiveness kind of doesn't, it's like all of these concepts seem to have lost their juice, because it's all just life doing what it's doing, and the people that are supposedly needing to be forgiven are seen as just energetic actors on a stage almost. It's not really seen as personal, if you know what I mean. It's a very different perspective now. So if we looked at can you forgive yourself, it's like, well, what are you forgiving? Are you forgiving conditioned patterns that happened in the character that that made this human do something wrong, harm others, or whatever it was that you are struggling to forgive yourself for? Usually that's what people are trying to forgive themselves for. It can be forgiving themselves for self-destructive behaviour. That can happen. But even that, it's just a loop on a loop and loop of thoughts. Look at the entity that was supposedly the one that didn't act a correct way. If it's firstly yourself, look at the entity and say, my gosh, with compassion, I see the complexity of that conditioning patterning that happened that way, and then that caused a reactive pattern because I was unconscious to those things, and this happened, and I said this or I did this to these people, and I really, or I did this, I had self-destructive tendencies because I was in so much suffering. My gosh, what's there to forgive there? That just is just the opposite. It should be compassion for yourself, for having gone through those experiences that created so much turmoil, so much suffering, so much, self deprecating behavior. So that's one thing. Just like have compassion for all the character traits in yourself that are causing you suffering. It's a loop. It's just all of that's just a perpetual thought turning in on itself. Just none of that stuff needs to be done if the real entity that's looked at can just be seen as a fluid flow of life experiencing that way. And with all the conditioning that seems to have accumulated that way, it's okay. It's okay. So you don't need to forgive yourself. You just need to have compassion for the conditioning that manifested that way. But ultimately, looking back, it's firstly, who is the one that instigated those things? Who is the one that created those unpleasant harm to others? Who is the one that's actually done? And then look at that, and then, well, how did that come about? Oh, it's not like you just appeared and you made an isolated choice to be bad one day. It's all this accumulated life coming up that way with all the conditioning, probably inherited characters and genes and all sorts of stuff, and the energy that we're interacting with, the environment we're interacting. All of this is playing out as what we call you, what we call I, what I call I am doing all of this, and I don't really know why. Because of all of this interactions happening this way. And you are part of that. You are an expression in that. You are not separate from all of that. So It's not a matter of forgiving yourself. It's a matter of seeing yourself for what it is and then saying, and that happened. Okay, that happened that way. And there's been a new light shone on that through inquiry or through this sort of discussion. And it's seen differently now. That's all. That's all. That's all there is to forgiveness. Change. Do you want to stay as that idea that you want to keep that? Or do you want to just see that that's not true? That's a thought. And everything's changing anyway. There are consequences if you harm people. They won't like you, and there'll be repercussions, and there can be all sorts of things that happen from that. It's just the way the society is designed, and that's there's lots of reasons for that. Quarantine people that are going to harm others, and that's what we do, and I think that's justifiable. But ultimately, I'd love everyone to be rehabilitated and just to be free, because we're all the same. We're all one. We're all connected. So there's just compassion for all of these things. And where there's compassion, there's no real need for forgiveness. Because it's just like, there's only need for forgiveness if there is an entity that's hanging on to the idea of, and maybe two entities that are hanging on to those ideas. When there's nothing hung on to by any particular entity, and it's seen as a changeable, fluid nature of life, and it might take time for that trust to be reestablished, if ever. But still, the idea of forgiveness should just be an open generosity with compassion. And of course, if you're forgiving others, that's the next thing. If you're forgiving others for actions that they have done to you, words or actions that they have done against you, it can also be seen that whatever that human being is expressing and doing is an accumulation of suffering that's been projected. We're all just interactive mirrors. It's not to say that you should condone any. I don't condone the actions that are perpetuated by sort of very negative, dark energy in people. I don't condone those actions, but there's great compassion for how that came about. And then once again, it should be quarantined. If there needs to be restitution, that can be sought after in society. But the idea of forgiveness is really just, it's compassion. And on a very selfish level, right back to, okay, I haven't quite let go of the self and all these things. If that's the situation that the person's going through, on a very selfish level, by forgiving the other, you're really just letting go of the suffering that you're holding on to anyway. So that's just a very, very superficial level of forgiveness. When you forgive someone else, truly let go of that anger and that injustice or whatever's going on, you just lighten the load. It's gone. You can remember it. You can take care next time. But holding on to that is what actually creates so much suffering. Do you want to do that to yourself? Because that person probably doesn't have an idea at all that you are creating this suffering. We have this idea that if we create that suffering in ourselves, because it's unjust and they should be punished, and we think that they should be morally see their wrongdoing, they probably haven't got a clue. They're probably so identified in what they're doing. They're probably so conditioned that they don't understand. You're not going to punish them by beating yourself up and holding onto this energy. They won't be affected by that most of the time. Unfortunately, it seems that it's not shared when there's conditioned separation. So, lighten the load for yourself. Ease the suffering that is pointless. The only point is to remind yourself to not get hurt again. So it's a learning lesson. That can be good. But the churning of suffering and why did they, injustice and how dare they, all of this stuff, just hurting yourself. So let go of that. Forgive them so that you can be free. That's a really nice way to look at it. It's a very superficial way. There's much deeper levels to all of this, as I've alluded to before. But and I've just gone superficial on a much deeper level than even the structured conversation I just had. On a much deeper level, there is an energetic interaction that happens, regardless of words, all these things. There is an energetic exchange that happens between people. And it's, this is just how it feels, that there is sort of, everything is connected, and there's, we have quantum entanglement and all this. The energy, the dark energy that you hold on to, it's funny, I've had experiences of this, when this is let go of, when you find the courage and the self-compassion to let go of this, the compassion to let go of what's going on, what's holding, what the injustice is, or the thing that you think needs forgiving, when that's let go of, just without the thoughts, without any ideas, without conversation, without anything, just the energy of that's let go of, it's funny, this changes. Well, I've seen it in personal experience, this changes. The other person who may be oblivious to all of this seems to change, seems to be, there's a lightness. Now, it may not feel like there's a tit for tat and a balancing of the scales of injustice. It may not feel like that while you're still hanging on to, there should be vengeance, there should be revenge, there should be all of these things. I don't know whether I can forgive. But when it's let go of, your load lightens, whatever that character is, and the other person seems to also, in some ways, not all the time, but in some ways I've noticed that they seem to harmonize, and there's a peace that comes into the interaction. And ultimately, that's really all you want, harmony and peace with others. So you can hang on to the actions and the interactions and the justice and the revenge and the forgiveness, all these concepts, but ultimately, if the energy is let go of, there's just a rebalancing anyway. And that's a more harmonious way to live for this person. They'll still have their guard up probably for that person to, because they know that person is capable in their conditioning to do that. But there is just a balancing, there's a harmony that comes into that, which is just a more joyful way to live, even for the person that has been wronged, supposedly wronged, So there's a few reasons why the idea of forgiveness can really be let go of. There are just things that have happened through much more complicated mechanisms of conditioning. So let go and forgive. We'll call it forgive, but it's sort of just really letting go.